Perfect. All right. Well, before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we're on Treaty 8 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Dene, and Métis people. We'd like to thank Apple Schools for making it possible to bring in our wonderful guests today. So today we have Michael Kusugak, who's an award-winning author from Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, coming to us live today from Manitoba. Michael has published over a dozen books, and he was encouraged to get started by his boys writing his first book, A Promise is a Promise. And he's won many awards since then. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Michael.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Michael Kusugak. Kusugak means icicle, or actually those things that hang down in caves, stalactites, right? Stalactites. Yeah, that was my father's name actually, and we are Inuit, and in our culture, we don't usually have surnames like you do in English. We are all named after individual people. And when I was going to school in Chesterfield Inlet, one of these residential schools, we lived in the attic of the old Catholic mission there. And every morning I used to climb down the stairs to go to church, which was part of the mission. And down at the bottom of the stairs, there was always this old man who stood or sat there in a chair. And when I came down, he would take me by my hand and he would take me outside. All year long, he took me outside, and then he would tell me all about the weather. He would tell me about the wind. He would tell me about the snow blowing over there. And he'd tell me about the way the clouds looked, the way the sun looked, and all the stuff. And I was 6 years old. And so one morning, I think it was just before my 7th birthday, we were standing there and he was holding my hand, showing me all the stuff. And I looked at him and I said, "Why do you do this?" He said, "Why do I do what?" I said, "Why do you take me out here and show me all this stuff?" And he said, "Who are you?" I said, "Akbaluk." He said, "Me too." "And who else are you?" I said, "Nokadlak." He said, "Me too." "And are you anybody else?" I said, "Michelle." He said, "Me too." And he said, "And are you anybody else?" I said, "No, that's it." And he said, "Me too." And he said, "See, you're me and I'm you." And this is what I do every morning. I go outside, I look at the clouds, I look at the sky, I look at the sun, I look at the snow blowing on the ground, I feel the wind. And that way, he said, I have an idea of what the day is going to be like, so I can prepare for it every morning. And because you're me, this is what you have to do. So that day I learned who I was. I was that old man. And so my name is actually Michel. I was baptized by a French priest, and I didn't get the name Kusugak until I was about 13 or 14 years old, because the government decided Inuit are too confusing because everybody in their family has different names. So we have to do something about that. And they sent this guy around to tell us about surnames, what surnames are. And so we chose my father's name, Kusugak. And that day we chose his name, we became the Kusugak family. So that's why I'm Michael Kusugak today. And it was Michel actually, but I never learned to speak French. Well, we are in Manitoba. We live in Manitoba, and down that way about an hour and 10 minutes by truck is, or car, is Winnipeg, Manitoba. And out here about 2 blocks away, there's a huge lake called Lake Winnipeg, and it goes way up there somewhere. And if you go that way to the very north end of Manitoba, you end up on Hudson Bay. And Hudson Bay is in the territory Nunavut. Nuna means land and Vut means hour. So Nunavut is land hour. And when I was learning English, I always thought that English is a very strange language because everything is backwards. You see, we say Nunavut, and if you say that, it means, if you translate that, it means land hour. Nuna is land and Vut is hour, so land hour. But if you say it in English, you have to say it backwards, our land. And if you say something like Anguta Uyunga, you translate that into English, it becomes boy, A-M-I. But if you say it in English, you have to say it backwards, I am a boy. So I always thought English is very strange because it's backwards. And if you go to Hudson Bay and you go to the very, very north end of Hudson Bay, there's a tiny little place that we call Nauyat. And Nauya means seagull. And there are big cliffs there where seagulls come to nest every summer. And that's why we call it Nauyat. In English, it was called Repulse Bay. And we have no idea why it was called Repulse Bay. For one thing, because there's nothing repulsive about it. You know, it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Well, Nauyat is right on the Arctic Circle. And up there, in the middle of the winter, the sun doesn't quite come up. It almost comes up over the horizon, but then it goes back down again. In the summer, the sun doesn't quite go down. It just goes round and round and round and round all day and all night long. So in the winter, it's almost always night. And in the summer, it's almost always day. And when I was a little boy, that's where I lived. And it's, you know, right on the Arctic Circle in the place we call Nauyat. And early in the morning, my father would get up, he would go outside, he would look at the weather to see what it was going to do, just like my old namesake taught me. And then he would take our sled and he would turn it over. We used these huge sleds. They look like this. This is a model sled that I got from a friend of mine in northern Quebec. But we use exactly the same kinds of sleds. And the one that I had when I was living in Rankin Inlet was 20 feet long. And it has two runners like this. And it's got these cross pieces that are all tied together. And we call them naput. And they're all tied together so that when we're going over really rough snow, our sleds will not fall apart. So they're all tied together in a very special way. And when I got this sled, it had a little box on it. And because that is what we use today, when we're out hunting or fishing, we put a box on it so people can ride in the box, and we can have lots of room in the box to put, you know, fish and all kinds of stuff in. Well, when I was a little kid, we didn't have plastic to use for sled runners. So along the bottom, all along the bottom, we had frozen mud. It was actually peat moss that was cut up into tiny little bits, and we put it in a pail and we mix it up with water until it's like mud. And then we put it all along the bottom here and we let it freeze. And when it's all frozen, we would plane it with a regular hand plane and make it as smooth as we can. And then my father would take a piece of polar bear skin, just like this. This is polar bear skin. And he would take a piece of polar bear skin and a kettle of water. He would pour the water on the polar bear skin, and he would rub it along the bottoms of the sled runners. And he would let the water freeze. So we ended up with this nice layer of ice all along the bottoms of the sled runners, and that's what we traveled on. And when my father was all finished icing the sled, he would roll it back up, he would move it back and forth to make sure it was nice and smooth. And then we would take all our stuff out from inside our igloo. We would put them on the sled. We would roll them up in huge skins and tie them all down. And then we would hitch our dogs to our sled and we would go traveling all day long. Well, where we come from, there are no trees. There's not one single tree that grows where we come from. And because we have no trees to get in the way, we hitch our dogs all on separate lines. So every dog has his very own line. We might have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 dogs. They all have their own lines. The dogs that like to run get the longest lines, and the lazy ones get the short ones. And when we were going along, the dogs would jump over each other, over and over and over and over, until their lines were so tangled that they couldn't run anymore. We would stop. My father would take all the lines off the dogs. He would untangle them all. My mother would get us some lunch, and after lunch, we would go traveling all the rest of the day. And of course, sometimes it gets a little cold. The coldest day I remember was -52. And if you're going to be outside all day long in really cold weather, you have to wear really, really warm clothes. So we wore the warmest clothing in the world. I had a caribou skin coat, and this is caribou skin. And I had a caribou skin coat made out of this stuff, and it was like a sweatshirt with a hood, and it had fur on the inside. So I had caribou fur right up against my skin. And that's what I wore mostly inside. And when I was outside, I would wear another coat made out of this, and it would have the fur on the outside. So when I was a little kid, I spent a lot of time looking kind of like, you know how when you're little and your mom gets cold and she puts layers and layers and layers of clothing on you and you can hardly move. And even then, when I was sitting on the sled for a long time, just bouncing up and down, after a while I would start to get cold. And when I got cold, I would jump off the sled. I would run along beside the sled until I got all warmed up. Then I would sit back down again. And sometimes I didn't even have to jump off because we would hit a bump and I would fall off. And then I'd have to run to catch up. So we traveled like that all day long. And at night, when we stopped, my father would build an igloo. When the igloo was all ready, we'd go inside, we'd bring all our stuff inside. My mother and my grandmother would light a big stone seal oil lamp called a hoodlet. And these things are like this. This is a hoodlet that we got from a friend of ours in Rankin Inlet, and they're made of soapstone, so they're really quite heavy. But this is really small. The ones that we used were really big like this. So, you know, they were really, really heavy. And they have a depression on the top, you know, a lower part here. And that is where you put the seal oil. And you put a wick all along the front here, and it soaks in the seal oil, and then you light it. And when it's all lit, it looked like a whole row of candles all along the front. And that's what we used to heat our igloos and to cook with. And my mother and my grandmother would light one of those. They would start to cook us something to eat. They would heat up the inside of the igloo a little bit because sometimes it was really quite cold. And then they would make up a bed, a nice big bed with lots of warm furs. And every night, when I was all finished eating, I would go to bed. And when I went to bed, I would say to my grandmother, "Ananatya kunikakto alawit." And my grandmother would say, "Unikakto ag sa kangin nama." "Grandmother, please tell me a story." But I have no story to tell And after I asked her many, many times, she would finally say, okay, settle down and I'll tell you a story. And my grandmother told me some of the most wonderful stories I have ever heard. When I was a little kid, I think my most favorite story was the one that goes, Ananakyari o kimaktawyuk, kopanoado kulumiguy tawyuk, palatatatyuk. It's a story about a little kid and her grandmother, and they got left behind all by themselves in their igloo, and then a little bird came, a little white bird, a snow bunting. It broke the window, it said palatatatyuk and flew away. And that was the story. And I really loved that story. And I would ask my grandmother to tell it to me over and over and over until she got tired of it. And then I would have to ask her again, and she would say, grandmother, please tell me another story. But I have no story to tell. But of course, my grandmother always had lots and lots of stories to tell. Well, we are Inuit. And, ever since I started reading in English, I have been really interested in what people think about us. So I read a lot. And a long time ago, I read that Inuit have been around for 4,000 years. And then somebody else wrote something else. And they said, no, Inuit have been around for 6,000 years. And then somebody else wrote in a magazine that Inuit have been around since the last ice age. Now, if that's true, then we would have to have been here in North America for more than 10,500 years, because the ice age ended 10,500 years ago. And I'm sure all the ice didn't all melt at the same time, like, all of a sudden. So, and they say that during that ice age, the strait, that water between Alaska and Siberia, they say that was dry land. For some reason, the ice, which was miles thick, sucked all the water out of there somehow, and there was dry land. And they say Inuit trekked across there and ended up in North America. Well, I don't think so. Because I know what it's like to trek. You see, when we were kids, when I was a kid, we lived, the really traditional Inuit lifestyle. We traveled by dog sled. We lived in igloos all winter long and soft huts, and we lived in tents all summer long. The only modern things that we had were metal pots and metal knives, and we had metal things and guns and those kinds of things. And but a long time ago, we didn't have any of those things. But we had to make our kudlets out of soapstone. And they were really big, so they were really, really heavy. And pots were made out of the same stuff. So if you have a pot that is this big and this tall and this wide, it would be pretty heavy. And if you have to trek from Siberia to Alaska, that space in between Siberia and Alaska, the Bering Strait, is 52 miles wide, which is 83 or 84 kilometers wide. Well, and if it was dry land, it would have been really hard to hunt anything there. So we probably would starve to death before we ended up anywhere we could find any food. So I think we have been going back and forth between Siberia and Alaska for a very, very, very long time because we didn't have to have ice to go across because we had invented these things. This is a model kayak. It is made out of wood, but if you notice, it uses very little wood. And that is because in most places where we live, there are no trees. So wood is very, very hard to get. And it is so hard to get that one thing we never ever did was burn wood because it was too precious to burn. So we made kayaks out of it and used strips, and we tied them all together like our sleds so that they would flex and they would be flexible. So when you're going over really rough water, they wouldn't break, they wouldn't fall apart. So we invented these things a long, long time ago, and so long ago that they are in some of the very first stories ever told by Inuit. We had kayaks a long time ago. So we have been going back and forth, from over there to North America in these things. And this is not the only thing that we invented. We also invented something called an umiak. And an umiak is a huge boat. Some of them are like 30 feet long, and they're an open boat, like a regular open boat, and you paddle them and you sail them. And so we've had those things for a long time. They're made the same way as a kayak. And we've had those things for a long time. So I think we've been going back and forth from, maybe northern Japan to Alaska by the Aleutian Islands, or across Bering Strait, which is only like say 52 miles wide. And there's also an island in the middle. So that would be no problem getting across there. But when we came, there was nobody around. It was land that had nobody living in it. And for some strange reason, we decided to settle in one of the coldest places in the world, when we could have moved down here where it's warm. We could have moved to Alberta or BC or Montana or North Dakota, anywhere, south where it's warm. But we settled in one of the coldest places in the world. Why? I think it is because it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And we have, absolutely gorgeous, we have a word for it. We call it kajagnak. It is so beautiful. And when we came, there would have been nobody around. So we couldn't go around asking, how do you live here? And we couldn't ask anybody, what do you eat? How do you dress? What do you live in? How do you travel? How do you hunt? How do you fish? All these questions we had, but there was nobody to ask. So we had to figure it out from scratch. And along the way, we invented some amazing things. We invented kayaks, we invented igloos, we invented harpoons, we invented sleds, we invented boots, very special boots. And these are my old work boots. They are made out of seal skin with all the fur scraped off. And these are warm, they are light, and they are waterproof. So we invented waterproof boots long before anybody else had waterproof boots, long before anybody ever thought of rubber boots. And we even invented toys. And I have a toy here. And this toy is made out of seal bone. Most Inuit live on the coast. We live on the Arctic Ocean coast. We live on the Atlantic coast. We live on the coast of Hudson Bay. So most Inuit live on a coast, and that is so that we can hunt seals, we can hunt whales, we can hunt walruses, we hunt polar bears, and all these kinds of things. And this bone comes from a great big seal, and that big seal has skin that is very thick and really tough. And we use the skins for the bottoms of our boots, so they wear for a long time. And these are kamik. They're called kamik, by the way. And this bone came from that seal, the big seal. And if those seals had legs, this would be a bone from one of the legs. And my uncle made this for me. He chopped off a piece of the bone here, a piece here, and another piece here. And I attached a little stick to it on a piece of string. And you have to flip it up in the air, and you have to catch it in this little hole right there. So you play it like this. This is the first time I've got it in these last 4 sessions I've had with people from Fort McMurray. So we used to have contests with games like this. So after a while, when we came, we were living a very comfortable life because we had heat. There's very thick fat under the skin of the seal, and if you pound it with a mallet, oil seeps out of the fat, and we used it to in our kudliks to heat our igloos and to cook with. So we had absolutely everything. We even had toys. We invented harpoons and fishing spears, and we even invented drums. So after a while, we were really comfortable, and there got to be more and more and more Inuit. And today, there are Inuit all across the north. There are Inuit in Siberia, there are Inuit in Alaska, there are Inuit all across northern Canada, including northern Quebec and Labrador, and there are Inuit in Greenland. And we all speak the same language. We, with many different dialects of the Inuit language. And so I can talk to people from Alaska in my language, and I can talk to people from Greenland. Some of them are a little difficult to understand because the dialects are so diverse, but we can still understand each other enough to get by. And so when you have a lot of people in one place, one thing you need are rules about how to get along with each other, how to live in peace. You need rules about how to take care of young people so that you can raise them up to be respectable adults. You need rules about how to take care of the old people, because the old people have all this knowledge because they've been around for a long time, and you want to learn that knowledge before they pass away. You need rules about how to take care of the land because the land sustains all the animals that give you food, that give you clothing, that give you heat. And so we need all these rules. And where did we get those rules? Well, a long time ago, we made up all those rules. And then we had to teach them to the next generation of people. So what we did was we incorporated them into our stories. So if you listen to these stories enough times, you get to learn lessons that are in the stories, just like Bible stories, And the most famous person in our stories is a man called Kivio. My grandmother said Kivio was born a long time ago, so long ago that he was the very first person on earth. I used to have a little joke with my grandmother, I would say, "Grandmother, if Kivio was the first person, how come he had a mother?" And my grandmother would say, "Don't argue with old people." But my grandmother was very kind and gentle, and I wasn't very scared of her. So I would tease her, "Grandmother, you know, he had a mother. How could he be the first person?" Well, the old people say Kivio is still alive, but he is so old, his body is turning to stone. So ever since the beginning of time, we have known about how, things petrify, how you get, dinosaur bones that are all stone. And so Kivio is turning to stone. And the old people say someday when his heart turns completely to stone and stops, that will be the end of the universe. And there are many, many, many stories about this man. So if you go to Siberia, you can hear stories about Kivio. If you go to Alaska, you can hear stories about Kivio. We have Kivio stories all across northern Canada, and there are Kivio stories in Greenland too. And I'd like to tell you a little story to show what these stories are like. A long, long time ago, there was a little boy. And this little boy was blind. And because he was blind, his mother did not really like him. So she didn't feed him very well because she always wanted a perfect boy, but the boy was blind. And so he was very poor, and his mother, and he had a little sister, and his little sister really loved him. And she would steal some food, and she would feed the little boy some food, and otherwise he didn't eat very well because his mother didn't like him. And so the three of them lived way off somewhere all by themselves, and so they would get a bit of food, and the mother would eat the food and give some to her daughter, and the daughter would hide some food in his sleeve. And when his mother wasn't looking, or when her mother wasn't looking, she would feed it to her brother. And so they lived like that. And in the winter, of course, they lived in igloos and by themselves, way out somewhere. And one day, a polar bear came, and the mother was really scared of the polar bear, and the daughter was scared of the polar bear. And the boy, he was getting big and strong, but he was still blind. And so his mother gave him a bow and arrow, and she said, "Pull the arrow back and I will help you aim. And when I say go, you let it go." And so he put the arrow in the bow, and he pulled back, and his mother helped him aim, and she said, "Go," and she let the arrow go. And then he said, "Well, did I get the bear? Did I get the bear?" And the mother says, "I don't know whether you got the bear or not, And she said to the girl, "Go and see if he got the bear." And the little girl went out and found the bear dead. And she told her mother, and the mother told the boy, "No, you missed the bear." So they had bear meat, and the mother would cook some bear meat, and then she and her daughter would eat the bear meat, and the little girl would hide some bear meat in her sleeve, and when her mother wasn't looking, she would feed it to the boy, her brother, and so they lived like that. And in the summer, it was absolutely beautiful outside, and the blind boy, would sit on the beach, just listening to all the sounds around him. And he would look around and hear the birds singing and the loons, and he would hear the geese and ducks and all kinds of things all around him. And one day he was sitting on the beach, listening to all these sounds when the little girl came, and the boy said, "Back in the hills back there, is there a lake?" And the girl said, "Yeah, there's a lake back there. I go to get water from there." And the boy said, "Are there loons on the lake?" And the girl said, "Yeah, there's a pair of loons that live on that lake." And the boy said, "Little sister, can you take me there?" And so the little girl grabbed her brother by the hand and walked her along. And as they were walking, every once in a while, the boy would stop and he would say, "Little sister, make a pile of stones." And the little girl would pile up some stones, and then they would walk on, and he would stop and he'd say, "Pile up some more stones." And she would pile up some more stones, and they walked and walked until they came to the lake. And the boy said, "Are the loons on the lake?" And the girl said, "Yeah, they're right there. The loons are right there." And he said, "Okay, you can go home now. I'll come and see you later. I'll see you later." And so the girl walked home, and the boy was out there all alone beside the lake. And he walked up to the lake and he knelt down very close to the water. And the loons came over, and the loons looked at the boy, and they said, "You can't see, can you?" And the boy said, "No, I can't see anything." And the loon said, "Would you like to see?" And the boy said, "Yeah, that's why I'm here. I would love to be able to see." And the loon said, "Open your eyes." And the boy opened his eyes, and the loon said, "What do you see?" And the boy said, "Nothing." And the loon said, "Well, we'll tell you what. You keep your eyes open, and just keep them open. No matter how much it hurts, you have to keep your eyes open." And the boy opened his eyes really wide, and the loons started to lick his eyeballs. And it hurt so much because the tongues of the loons were really rough, and they were licking his eyes, and he kept his eyes open, and finally the loon stopped, and they said, "Well, what can you see?" And the boy said, "I can see light. It is light." And the loon said, "What else can you see?" And the boy said, "Nothing, just light." And the loon said, "Well, we'll have to lick your eyes some more. So keep them open. No matter how much it hurts, keep them open." And he kept his eyes open, and the loons licked and licked and licked. And it was so painful that he could barely keep his eyes open, but he kept them open the whole time. And finally, the loon stopped, and they said, "Now what do you see?" And the boy looked around and he said, "I can see you, and I can see the lake." And they said, "And what else do you see?" And the boy looked across over to the other side of the lake, and he said, "I can see something green over on the other side of the lake." And the loon said, "Can you see what it is?" And the boy said, "No, it's just green. I can see green over there." And the loon said, "Well, we're going to have to lick your eyes some more. And keep your eyes open. Don't close them, no matter how much it hurts." And the boy kept his eyes open, and the loons licked and licked and licked. And it hurt so much that, he really wanted to close his eyes, but he kept them open. And finally, the loon stopped licking his eyes. And then they said, "Now what do you see?" And the boy looked across over to the other side of the lake, and he said, "Grass. It is grass. I can see green grass over on the other side of the lake. I can see the leaves. And the loon said, now you can see. And the boy was so happy he had a necklace. And he took the necklace off his neck and he gave it to the loons and he put it around the loons' necks. And as they flew away, they separated and the necklace broke. And that is why, to this very day, loons have a broken necklace around their necks. Can you hold on a sec? I have to go and answer the phone. My wife's not here. I think they gave up. Anyway, so the boy could see, and the loons have a broken necklace around their necks, and the boy walked home, following the little piles of stones that his sister had piled up along the way, and when he got there, he saw that the bearskin was lying on the ground, all pegged to the ground, drying in the sun, and beside it was an old dog pelt that was drying in the sun, and the boy learned to become a very good hunter, and he would go out hunting with his little sister, and they would catch seals, they would catch whales and walruses and all kinds of animals, and then they would go home and they would eat very well, but the boy did not feed his mother very well because she had been so mean to him. And one day his mother said, why don't you feed me very well? And the boy said, well, we do all the hunting and fishing, and we have to eat well because we do all the hunting. We supply all the food. And the old woman said, well, I can hunt too. And the boy said, oh, you can hunt? And he said, okay, come, let's go. And they went out and they went along the coast, and there were lots of whales, beluga whales. And the boy took the harpoon line and tied it around his mother's waist, and then he raised up his harpoon and he waited for the whales to go by. Now, the thing about whales, beluga whales are white, right? Right. But when they are young, they are not white. They are brown, or no, they're gray. As a matter of fact, when they're just newborn, they're almost black. They're so dark. And so they were waiting for the whales to go by close enough that he could harpoon them. And so the mother looked at the whales, and there was a gray one coming along, a smaller whale, young whale. And she said, that one, harpoon that one. And the boy lifted up the harpoon and he threw it. But instead of hitting the young whale, there was a great big, really white one over on the other side, and he harpooned that one. And as soon as the harpoon hit the whale started to swim away, and the mother started running along the beach. And then when the whale went down, the mother went down with the whale, because she was tied to the harpoon line. And so the boy stood there and watched for a while, and the whale came back up farther out, and behind him there was another whale. And then it went down under again. And then it came back up. It was farther out. And behind him, there was a narwhal. The old woman's braids had turned into a narwhal tusk. And then the whales went down again. And then they disappeared. But still, you could hear them. What have you done? What have you done? I fed you when you were a baby. I raised you. What have you done? And they say, if you go back to that place today and listen to the sea, you can still hear them. What have you done? What have you done? I fed you when you were a baby. I raised you. What have you done? And that's a story about how the whale, the narwhal, got its tusk. And they say, never, ever be mean to people, to young people who have problems like blindness and other things, because they have some very powerful things that look after them. So we heard all these stories. And when I grew up, I got 4 boys. I have 4 boys. And when I only had 3 of them, I would put them to bed at night. And when I put my boys to bed, they would say, Dad, can you read us a book? They would get a book and I would read to them. And one night I got really, really tired of those books. So we put them away and I told my boys a story. And the story I told them became a book called A Promise is a Promise. And I wrote this with a friend of mine. I have a very good friend whose name is Robert Munch, and he and I wrote this book. But we wrote it, if you look at here, it's got a sticker that says Anniversary Edition 30 years. Well, it got that sticker 3 years ago. So this book is now 33 years old. And there are many different versions of it. This one is in Inuktitut. It's all written in Inuktitut syllabics. And I wrote that one. And then we had one made in French. This is the French version. And this one is in the language called Mi'kmaq. And it's a language of the Mi'kmaq people down in Nova Scotia. And then we found another one, and this one was made in Greenland. So it's in Greenlandic, Inuktitut, and Danish. And there's another one in Chinese. And when I was finished writing that book, I wrote another book, and the book is called Baseball Bats for Christmas. And this is a true story. It's a story about me and my friends. When I was 7 years old, I skipped school. And that year, just before Christmas, another airplane came. And this airplane brought a bunch of Christmas trees. And when they took all the trees out of the airplane, we all looked at them and we said, oh, what are they? Because we had never, ever seen a tree before. A friend of mine said, they're standing ups. He said he had seen them in books at the church. So we asked him, what are they for? He said, I don't know. Because we had never, ever had Christmas trees. So we threw them out in Snowbank and we forgot all about them. But we had a wonderful time at Christmas. We all went to church at midnight. And when we went to church, Father Didier, our priest, would play a big organ. And when he played the organ, we would all sing, Ati upirtusi, tamapsi kayiti, takuyaktuliriti. And Christmas came. Christmas was a time when you took your most favorite thing in the world and you gave it to your very best friend. I had a toy gun that looked like a real gun. It had bullets that looked like real bullets. And I loved that toy, but I took it, I carried it behind my back, and I went to see my friend Peter. When I walked into his igloo, I walked up to him, I shook his hand, I said, Happy New Year, and I gave him the gun. And that was the way you gave Christmas presents. And every time you gave a present, you got one back. And Peter gave me his mitts, which were made of caribou skins. They were exactly like this. These are mitts that my aunt in Nauyat made for me, and they're made from the leg skins of the caribou. And they are the warmest mitts that you will ever wear. And Peter gave me his, and they were really warm. Now, at Christmas time, I used to get one of these rubber balls. You remember the ones that are red and blue and they have a white stripe around the middle? We loved to play ball. And every time I got one of those rubber balls, we would go outside. We would look for a stick to use for a bat. And when we found a little stick, we would carve a little handle on it and we would play ball all day long. But there are no trees in Repulse Bay. And when there are no trees, you can hardly ever find a stick to use for a bat. In 1955, the year I skipped school, there were trees in Repulse Bay. There were those 6 Christmas trees that the airplane had brought. And one day, another friend of mine was looking at those Christmas trees when he said, "I know what those things are for." We said, "What?" He said, "Baseball bats." So we ran home, we got an axe, we chopped off all the branches from one of these Christmas trees, and we made it into a baseball bat, a real round bat. It was the best Christmas present we ever got. We played ball all spring and all summer long, and every time we broke a bat, we would just go and get another Christmas tree and chop off all the branches and make another baseball bat. And in the fall, we ran out of Christmas trees and we could hardly wait for Christmas when that airplane would come back and it would bring us more baseball bats for Christmas. And that is why I call the story Baseball Bat for Christmas. Well, you know, before COVID came along, we used to travel everywhere telling stories, and everywhere I go, I like to give people a little taste of what it's like to live way up north. Sometimes when the wind blows, there is so much snow flying around that you can't see anything at all. And if you go for a walk, you get lost right away. So when I was a little boy, sometimes we had to sit in our igloos for a long time. And it got to be really, really boring. And I'd say to my grandmother, "Ananak, I am so bored." And my grandmother would say, "Why don't we play a game?" And I'd say, "But grandmother, we don't have any toys." And my grandmother said, "But we have the best toy in the world." And she would take a piece of string. And I'd say, "But grandmother, that's not a toy, that's just a piece of string." And my grandmother said, "But this is very special string. This is magic string. This is string that does not like to be tied to your fingers. It always comes off." And she would tie up her fingers like this. And sure enough, her string always came off. And she would say, "Even if you tie up your fingers really good and tight, this string still does not like to be tied to your fingers. It always comes off." And she would tie up her fingers really good and tight like this. And sure enough, her string always came off. And she would say, "Even if you tie up your fingers any old way, just tie them up any old way like this string still does not like to be tied to your fingers. It always comes off." So we played with the string for a long time before long, the wind was all gone and we could go outside to play again. And we learned how to tell stories with string. And I would like to tell you a little story. I'd like to tell you a story about a whale. Oops. First of all, we have to find a whale. And somewhere in there is a whale. And here is the whale. Now, this is the head of the whale. These are the flippers up here and down here. The body is here in the middle and the tail is over at this end, and the whale swims like this. Now, this whale is not very smart. And one day it decides to show off. So it swims really fast. It swims so fast it goes zooming right up on the beach and it can't get back in the water. And you know what happens to a whale that can't get back in the water? And you know what really, really loves dead whales? Are seagulls, because along comes a seagull and here comes a seagull. There's a seagull. This is the head of the seagull. This is the beak. The neck is here. The body is here in the middle. The tail is over at this end and the legs are down here at the bottom. You see the seagull standing there? Now the seagull comes, it eats up the flippers of the dead whale. It eats a lot of the skin, which is called mukta, because that's what seagulls really, really, really like. And then along comes a polar bear, and here comes a polar bear. This is the head of the polar bear here. This is the nose. Those are the front legs down here at the bottom. The back is here, and the back legs are over here. Now, this polar bear is pretty skinny. That's because it's really, really hungry. And this polar bear comes along and it eats up all the meat from the dead whale. And then along comes a little fox, and here comes a little fox. See the little fox? Now this little fox comes, it cleans up all the bones. It nibbles on all the bones, and then it walks away. And here it goes. And that's my story about the whale. And those are all the stories I have for you for today.
Oh, thanks, Michael. That was awesome. And you don't mind answering a few questions?
No.
All right, we've got quite a few out there. Let me just grab these. All right. What would you say is your process for writing your books?
Well, I have something like 16 books. And what I do is I think of an idea. I was thinking about, people dying. And what if somebody dies and you're really sad? What do you do about that, So I wrote a story called Northern Lights, the Soccer Trails. And it's a story about a boy or a girl whose name is Kusugak, and she has this wonderful time with her mother. But one day her mother dies and she's really, really sad. But when I was a little kid, we used to play soccer down on the sea ice in the fall when it was really, really smooth. And that is the time when it is mostly night all the time. And at night, when the moon is out and the sky is really clear, you can see northern lights. And we believe that when you die, your soul goes up into the heavens. And on a clear moon at night, all those people up there like to go out and they like to have a good time too. So what they do is they play soccer. And that is what the northern lights are, the souls of the dead playing soccer in the sky. So I wrote the story, Northern Lights, the Soccer Trails, about the girl whose mother dies and she's really sad because she's lost her mother. And then when her grandmother tells her the story, it makes her feel so much better that her mother has not really gone away. And so that is what I do.
Thanks, Michael. Someone asks, what is your favorite story, if you can remember, that your grandma told you?
My grandmother used to tell me these stories about a character named Kivio. And I think they're my most favorite stories because they are all across the north. In the first story about Kivio, he went across this ocean and ended up on the other side. And then he got homesick. So he started traveling, trying to find his way home. And we hear about his travels all across the north because there are stories about him everywhere now. There are stories about him in Siberia. There are stories about him in Alaska. There are stories about him all across the north, including places like Baffin Island and Agbiat. And there's stories about him in Greenland. So there are lots of these stories, and I used to listen to them at night when I went to bed, and my grandmother would tell them to me. And I just love those stories.
Oh, thanks. Someone says, how did you learn to tell the stories with the strings?
It is something we used to do when I was a kid. You know, we used to play with string all the time. And we started off just by something like, I don't remember how, but you make a cup and saucer, that kind of thing. And then we learned how to do these, and in Inuktitut, in my language, they're not really, you know, they can't, you know, come off your fingers like that, but they say they cut your fingers off. So we learned to do all those things. And and I learned to do that one story about the whale. It was so far back that I can't remember exactly where I learned it, but it's like one of those things that I've always known. And when we were young, you know, we used to trade. So if you knew one string story that I didn't know, that we would trade. I would teach you how to do the whale thing, and you would teach me how to make the, you know, the one where the caribou runs across the field or something like that. So it was like trading cards, I suppose. So, but we used to play with string for hours and hours.
Oh, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. What was it like the first time that you met Robert Munch, and were you nervous?
No, he's a very nice guy. It was, I think, around 1986. I was a member of the library board in Rankin Inlet, and in the spring, during Book Week, National Book Week, we invited him to come to Rankin Inlet. And when he accepted our invitation, we had a meeting, and we decided that we didn't want to put him in a hotel. We wanted to put him in somebody's house. And I said, well, if he doesn't smoke, he can stay at my house. And sure enough, he stayed at my house. And every night, you know, we'd sit around the dining room table, and my boys would say, Bob, can you tell us a story? And he would start to tell us all his stories. And then I started telling him, you know, all these traditional stories that my grandmother used to tell me. And so we got to be really good friends. And everywhere after that, you know, wherever we met, anywhere, we'd either stay in the same hotel room, and we would tell stories to each other all night long. So, you know, we were never nervous with each other. I got to stay at his house one day when I was in Guelph, Ontario. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I just want to make sure I'm being respectful of your time. So I think I will just thank you again for coming this week. This is our final session this week. I've got to tune into all the sessions. It's been really great listening to you. And just, yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I had a great time. And someday when all this COVID business is over, we're going to drive around, and maybe we'll stop by Fort McMurray and visit your school.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for everybody for tuning in. I think that's the last live stream for today. But if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see all the previous live streams as well. All right. Thank you.